That dinner, meant to be a celebration for my mother-in-law's 60th birthday, turned into a familiar scene of humiliation. Only this time, it cut deeper than usual. The kitchen was thick with the smell of Texas-style brisket, her signature dish. Glasses clinked, and the chandelier cast a soft golden light over the long table draped in white linen, where the whole extended family sat elbow to elbow, laughing and chatting. And yet, in the middle of all that noise, I felt strangely small, like a guest no one remembered inviting. My name is Noah. I'm 28. I'm a software developer. I'm not good at small talk. I avoid eye contact, and loud sounds overwhelm me. I live with Asperger's, a mild form of autism spectrum disorder. Some people call me weird. I just think I'm different. I stared at my plate. The colors were all mixed. My eye twitched slightly. I fought the urge to separate the salad to the left, the carrots to the right, like I always do. My therapist once told me I needed to learn how to be more flexible in public settings. So I started counting silently in my head, from 1 to 10. A calming tactic I'd picked up from years of therapy. Next to me, a cousin was blasting some game on his phone. Across the table, my sister Emma, always the mediator when things got tense between me and my brother-in-law, was fumbling to pour more water. And Chase, the one who once called me a walking robot while drunk, leaned back in his chair, swirling his wine like he'd just landed the punchline of a joke. Then he said it. "Hey, Noah, how's that little app of yours doing? You know, the one that teaches autistic kids how to talk to trees. Anyone actually use it? Or is it just for show on those news articles I didn't respond?" I just stared at my glass of water. My heartbeat quickened. The table slowly quieted. Emma looked up and snapped, "Chase." But he didn't stop. He even leaned closer, like we were sharing some private joke. "Hey, I'm not judging. I'm just wondering at kids like you. If they can't be fixed, at least they should learn to stay quiet during dinner. Right? Like a phone that won't stop glitching." A dry chuckle came from an uncle at the far end of the table, probably not even catching the insult. My mother-in-law, proud of her traditional brisket, quickly poured more wine like that would somehow smooth things over. My father-in-law kept his eyes on his plate, chewing in silence. No one stood up for me. I glanced at Emma, but her eyes were filled with helplessness. I took a deep breath and said softly, just loud enough for those near me to hear, "It's not a disease to cure. It's how my brain works." I wanted to say more. I wanted to scream that the app I built had helped over 10,000 families across the country with children on the spectrum, that I'd received an award from the state governor, that I worked 14 hours a day building something to make life better for people like me. But the words caught in my throat, clenched tight like a fist. Chase laughed, shrugging like I'd just confirmed his point. "See, I was just asking." Noah's always so touchy. I stood up. My hands trembled. The chair screeched across the floor. I walked out of the dining room, straight into the backyard. Garden lights dotted across the dew-soaked grass. I stood there, under the cold November sky, feeling hollow like someone had scooped me out with a spoon. No one followed me. Not a single voice called after me. Not a word of apology. I sat down on the porch steps, burying my head in my hands. My therapist once told me that in moments of sensory overload, I should find a quiet space. But no one had ever taught me how to survive when the isolation came from my own family. An old thought returned. Maybe I should just walk away from it all. Disappear. Quit. But then something flickered. I remembered the thank you messages from parents. The children who learned to express themselves for the first time because of the app I wrote. I remembered the moment I stood on stage to receive that award, even though my heart was pounding and my palms were soaked in sweat. And I asked myself, if I stayed silent now, how would that be any different from what they already think of me? I clenched my fists not out of anger, but to remind myself being different isn't broken. And I'd prove that to them. I stood up. The wind cut across the porch, cold as steel. But inside me, a quiet fire had just begun to burn. I didn't go back to the dinner table that night. I sent Emma a short text, "I'm okay. Heading home." She didn't reply. Maybe she didn't know what to say. Hours later, when I was already curled up in the stillness of my apartment, the only message I got was from my mother-in-law, Hope. "You're not upset for long. Chase was just joking." Just joking. I'd heard it so many times. It didn't even make me angry anymore, just hollow. But that hollowness turned into something else. A strange kind of fuel. Not to reclaim my dignity in front of them, but to remind myself that I have worth, even if they can't see it. I threw myself into work. I broke my daily routine down to the minute. 8 a.m. meditation, 9 a.m. coding, 12 p.m. lunch. Exactly 4 predetermined items. 1 p.m. app testing, 4 p.m. dev team meeting, 5:30 p.m. writing reports for nonprofit partners. The more they dismissed me, the more disciplined I became. The quirks they once called weird obsessing over details, memorizing speech patterns, struggling with small talk suddenly became my strengths. My app, Spectrum Talk, kept improving, a tool designed to help autistic users develop communication skills through realistic, AI-driven simulations. I stopped going to family gatherings. Emma texted a few times, things like, "I get it, but Mom misses you. Please try to come home for Christmas, I read them." I didn't respond. Chase? Of course, not a word of apology. Instead, I happened to see a picture he posted on LinkedIn standing at a tech conference in Houston, shaking hands with the CEO of a software company, one negotiating investments in digital health solutions. My stomach tightened, not out of jealousy, but because it hit me Chase had entered my domain. He knew the value of platforms like Spectrum Talk, and he might try to wedge his way in, or worse, sabotage it. So I started researching. A friend in the industry suggested I apply to a neuro health startup accelerator in Austin. I sent in my application without much hope. But a month later, I received an email. "Congratulations, you've been selected for the Founder Spectrum Cohort 5. We were truly impressed by your application." I read it 5 times. My hands trembled this time. With excitement, in Austin, I was paired with a mentor named Jonathan Pierce, a seasoned entrepreneur who'd lived with undiagnosed Asperger's for over 40 years. He said this during our first meeting. "You don't need to be like them, Noah. You just need to be better than them in your lane." Over the next 8 weeks, I learned more than I had in 2 years of college: how to raise capital, how to present to investors without being penalized for flat effect. Jonathan taught me how to turn even my perceived weaknesses like delayed responses into strengths by pre-planning every pitch down to the syllable. And I poured everything into demo day, where I'd present Spectrum Talk in front of over 20 venture capital firms. The night before, I called Emma. I'm pitching in front of more than 200 people tomorrow. "I'll probably freeze," I said, my voice a little hoarse. She paused, then said, "You once stood alone against the entire family, a stage with a few hundred people. You've got this for the first time in months." I laughed. On demo day, I didn't stare at the floor like I used to. I looked straight at the audience, mic steady in my hand. "Hi, I'm Noah. I'm not great at small talk. I don't tell jokes. But here's what I do know in the autism spectrum. A simple question like, 'How are you today?' can feel like a brick wall. Spectrum Talk helps break that wall." When I finished, the room erupted in applause. A representative from Bright Mind Ventures walked over right after my pitch. We talked for 30 minutes. By the end of the week, they sent over a term sheet of $1. $2 million seed investment? I stared at the number on the screen, not thinking about the money. What I saw was Chase's face. The last I heard of him was through Emma. She said he'd hit a wall on a new partnership because he couldn't grasp the autistic user market. I said nothing, just tucked the detail away, because I knew it wasn't time yet. But that time was coming. One afternoon in May, I got an invitation to speak at the National Health Tech Conference in Dallas. At first, I planned to decline. I've never liked crowds, and stage lights make me feel exposed. But then I saw the name of the event coordinator, Chase Walker. I couldn't believe my eyes. He was listed as the head of partnerships at a healthcare software company called NeuroPlus, a name I'd seen pop up in a few investor calls I'd attended. They weren't a direct competitor, but they operated in the same space, developing tools for people on the autism spectrum. Chase had officially entered the world I'd built from the ground up. I didn't decline. The week-long conference took place at the K. Bailey Hutchison Convention Center. Hundreds of startups, investors, health experts, and speakers from major institutions gathered under one roof. I was one of 12 founders invited to speak on how tech could create social impact for neurodivergent users. At the opening dinner, I spotted Chase, light gray suit, purple tie, grinning among a circle of wine-sipping executives. I stood 2 tables away, but when our eyes met, I saw the brief flicker in his expression. He hesitated, then walked over. Noah. Long time no see. Hey, Chase, I replied, shaking his hand. His palm was a little cold. He glanced down at my name badge and frowned. Spectrum Talk. That's at your app. Yep. Chase gave a short chuckle, but the confidence was gone from his smile. Heard you got funding from Brightmind. Congrats. Though apps like that? Tough to scale? We're working on a SaaS platform for neurocare. B2B model, not that emotional interaction stuff for consumers. I just nodded. Good luck with that. Chase. His jaw tightened, but I had nothing else to say. 3 days later, I gave my talk. In front of over 500 people. On screen was a video of Jackson, a 9-year-old boy answering his mom's question for the very first time after 3 years of therapy. Triggered by a prompt from Spectrum Talk, the room was silent. A few in the crowd wiped away tears. I ended with this: neuroscience tells us that autistic brains are different, not broken. Technology can't change how they think, but it can help the world understand them better. Within 24 hours, Tech Health Weekly ran the headline, Autistic Developer Redefines Communication Therapy Industry. 2 new investors reached out. A nonprofit proposed integrating Spectrum Talk into 12 public schools in Oregon. But just as everything seemed to be falling into place, the storm hit. An anonymous email was sent to the accelerator program I'd previously joined, accusing me of stealing my idea from NeuroPlus. It claimed I was once an intern there, and that Spectrum Talk was a copy of their internal platform, Neurocom. I went numb. That same night, I was asked to submit all my product development files. Jonathan, my mentor, called right away. His voice was calm. Noah, this is dirty. But it happens to people who do real work. You need to keep everything transparent and well documented. I stayed up all night gathering emails, source code, my patent filing date. The original design sketches I'd drawn at 24 years old. I sent everything. 3 days later, the program sent an official statement. No evidence of plagiarism found. Claims dismissed as unfounded. I exhaled, but I knew someone had tried to sabotage me. And I knew who. Emma called the next evening. Her voice was tense. Noah. Chase just told the family he took care of the weird kid and is prepping for his Series A next month. You better be careful. I paused, then said, Thanks, sis. But this time, I'm not backing down. I called my lawyer. I hired a digital forensics team to trace the email's origin, tracking the IP and metadata. The result: the anonymous message came from a Gmail account linked to a work laptop registered to C. Walker Neuroplus IO. I had legal, undeniable proof, but I didn't sue. I did something else. I quietly approached Neuroplus's biggest strategic partner, HealthSpan Networks, who held 32% of their equity. I pitched directly to their board. After 3 rounds of negotiation that stretched over a month, they agreed to sell their entire stake to Brightmind Ventures in exchange for exclusive rights to integrate Spectrum Talk into their clinical systems. Just like that, I became the controlling stakeholder of NeuroPlus. The day the deal was signed, one thought repeated in my head. Chase doesn't even realize. He just signed his own termination. But I didn't fire him. Not yet. I waited for a more fitting occasion. One where the whole family would be watching. That Christmas. For the first time in nearly 2 years. I accepted the invitation to return to my mother-in-law's home in Plano, Texas. Emma had texted, Mom's really hoping you'll come. Everyone's going to be there. It's also their 40th wedding anniversary. I hesitated. Not because I was still angry, but because I'd changed too much. I wasn't the same Noah who used to just sit there, silent and shrinking. I was now someone who controlled Chase's future, and he didn't even know it yet. And that made me want to see the look on his face when the truth hit. I drove in on the evening of December 23rd, Christmas lights blinking along every neighborhood street. I pulled up to the familiar white-fenced house lined with pine shrubs. As I stepped out of the car, I saw Emma standing at the door, smiling. I knew you'd come, she said, pulling me into a soft hug. The house radiated holiday cheer, colorful lights, a towering Christmas tree touching the ceiling, and the scent of cinnamon and apple pie filling the air. My mother-in-law, dressed in a sparkly red gown, was stirring a pot of mulled wine. Noah, I can't believe it. Come give Mom a hug. I forced a smile and obliged. My father-in-law shook my hand with polite detachment before turning back to chat with an old friend. The noise, the lights, the smells, it all began to close in on me. My senses felt like they were being pulled too tight. I slipped out to the backyard, where soft yellow lights lit the patio and rocking chairs creaked gently in the cold December breeze. I needed stillness, like I always do. And then a familiar voice came from behind. Didn't think you'd have the guts to show up. Chase. I turned around. He still had that polished-look charcoal blazer, 2 buttons undone on his shirt. Wine glass in hand? Why wouldn't I asked. He stepped closer, lowering his voice like we were sharing a secret. Heard you've got an app now? Congrats. But remember, this market's cutthroat. Don't get too comfortable. I looked at him calmly. You really haven't changed. And you're still the same old Noah hiding behind code and hoping the world gives a damn. I was about to respond when the back door flung open. Everyone inside, time to raise our glasses, my mother-in-law called. The entire family gathered in the living room. Under the Christmas tree, chairs were arranged in a crescent facing a small platform. Emma gently nudged me forward. Mom wants you to say a few words. About Christmas. About family. I stepped up, feeling dozens of eyes on me. Aunts, uncles, cousins, kids, even people I didn't recognize. Chase stood at the back, arms crossed, silent. I took a deep breath, the microphone trembling slightly in my hand. Hi, everyone. I'm Noah. Soft murmurs rippled through the room. A few heads nodded. I used to think I didn't belong here. Because I'm different. I'm not great with conversation. I struggle with eye contact. I've often felt like an outsider in my own family. I paused. Some even called me the weird one, told me I should learn to stay quiet. The room fell silent. A few people glanced at Chase. He didn't move. But there's one thing I understand better than anyone here: the power of persistence. I've spent the past 4 years building an app to help kids on the autism spectrum communicate better. And because of it, I got funded, I was recognized, and recently, I acquired majority ownership of a company called NeuroPlus, where some folks in this room used to work. You could feel the air freeze. I turned and looked straight at Chase. And as the new controlling shareholder, I'd like to formally announce starting January, Chase Walker is removed from the board of directors and relieved of his role as senior partner due to unethical conduct, defamation, and misuse of authority for personal gain. Chase's face flushed red. He started toward me, but an aunt stood up and blocked his path. "Chase, that's enough." My mother-in-law stammered, "Noah, what is this about?" I set the mic down, my voice low, but clear. "This isn't revenge, it's justice." I stepped down and walked through the room, a room that had once felt suffocating. All eyes followed me, but this time, it wasn't pity. It was respect. Only one person reached out and gently tapped my shoulder as I passed Emma. "Proud of you," she whispered. I gave her a soft smile. For the first time in my life, I felt like I belonged. I didn't go back to the party after leaving the stage. I walked out to the front yard and leaned against my SUV, tilting my head up to the Texas night sky. The cold wind stung my eyes, but it wasn't tears, just a natural reaction. Or at least that's what I told myself. The back door creaked open. Heels clacked on the wooden steps. "Emma." She stood beside me for a moment before speaking softly. "You just froze the whole house in silence." I let out a faint chuckle. Haven't felt that kind of silence in a long time. She sighed and pulled a steaming cup of coffee from her coat. "Mom's crying. Not because of Chase, but because she realized how wrong she's been with you." I took the cup. I don't blame her. I used to think if I stayed quiet long enough, they'd leave me alone. Emma shook her head. "Silence is how the weak survive. But tonight, you weren't the weak one anymore." A week after the party, I received an email from the interim board at NeuroPlus. Chase had officially resigned, citing personal reasons, but the fallout didn't stop there. A major financial paper, the Dallas Ledger, published an exclusive interview with me. The headline read, "Autistic founder quietly acquires rival company that once mocked him." The story went viral, not because it was scandalous, but because Americans resonated with the journey of someone once deemed odd, who never gave up. On Twitter, thousands shared the story with hashtags of someone different, notless, agents, Noah did it this way. A week later, I was invited to appear on NBC's morning talk show. The host, a poised blonde woman, tilted her head with a smile and asked, "Noah, what do you think kept you going, even when your own family doubted you?" I paused before answering, because I can't change how my brain is wired, but I can choose how I face the world. And I chose to face it through technology. The audience applauded. A few weeks later, I got an email from a mother in Minnesota. She wrote, "My son, age 6, hasn't spoken a full sentence in 3 years. But after using Spectrum Talk, he turned to me and said, 'Mom, smile.'" I cried all night. "Thank you, Noah." I set the phone down and finally cried. Truly cried for the first time in years. I remembered everything. The therapy sessions where I spent hours just learning how to look someone in the eyes. The times I was called a robot. The way I was treated like a broken piece of furniture at the family dinner table. It all led to this moment. I launched a new foundation called Embrace Spectrum, dedicated to giving autistic teens free access to life-changing tech. I asked Jonathan to be co-director, and Emma, my sister, became the head of our family advisory board. Then something happened that I never expected. My mother-in-law called. Her voice was shaky, stripped of the pride she used to carry. Noah, I know I was wrong. I thought Chase knew how to act. But that night, when you stood up like that, I realized I've never really understood you. I'm proud to have you as my son-in-law. I went still. Thank you. Mom? I said, but I don't need you to be proud. I just need you to see me for who I really am. And I do now, she whispered. As for Chase, I heard he left Plano and moved to Miami. Rumor has it he tried getting a job at a marketing firm, but no one would hire him. Partly because of the media attention, partly because in this industry, people don't forget as easily as you'd think. Emma told me, last time I saw Chase, he was drinking alone at that old bar. First time, he actually looked small. I didn't feel joy. I didn't feel triumph. I just felt peace, because I never needed him to fall for me to rise. All I ever wanted was to live authentically and be respected. 3 months after that fateful family gathering, I was invited to be the keynote speaker at the National Neurodiversity and Tech Conference in San Francisco, a symposium focused on building inclusive workplaces for neurodivergent individuals. The event took place that morning at the Moscone Center, with over 2,000 attendees. I walked onto the stage, bright lights shining directly into my face, but this time I didn't flinch. I didn't lock up. I didn't count 1, 2, 3 under my breath like I used to. I walked with purpose, mic steady in hand. Hello, everyone. My name is Noah Ryland. I grew up with Asperger's. And for a long time, I believed I had to learn how to act normal to be accepted. But I was wrong. What I really needed to learn was how to accept myself first. In the audience, I saw heads nodding. A middle-aged woman wiped away a tear. A group of college students stood up and clapped. In the front row, Jonathan and Emma beamed with pride. I spoke about Spectrum Talk, about how the app rebuilt bridges of communication for thousands of families. I even spoke about Chase without naming him, but made it clear I was once humiliated by my own family. Right at the dinner table, because my difference made them uncomfortable. But I chose not to become a victim of that discomfort. When I stepped off stage, people lined up to shake my hand, take photos, and share their thanks. But the one person I thought about most wasn't even there, Chase. I hadn't heard anything more about him. And honestly, I didn't need to. A week later, I was appointed to the Strategic Advisory Board of the Texas State Department of Health, consulting on tech solutions for neurodevelopmental support in schools. Emma joked that I was now officially the brother-in-law no one dares mess with. One chilly March evening, I visited Emma. We sat on her porch, sipping hot cocoa. The wind was still sharp, but inside, I felt calm. Do you hate Chase? Emma asked directly. I paused. Not really. I just feel sorry for him. Sorry? Yeah, because he'll never know what it feels like to have an entire room turn its back on you. But I do. And because I know that feeling, I would never wish it on someone else. Emma nodded slowly. I think. That's what makes you stronger than all of them. A month later, on a quiet Friday afternoon at the Spectrum Foundation office, a package arrived. No return name. Inside was a handwritten letter, the penmanship rough. Unfamiliar. Noah, I don't expect forgiveness. I just want to say I was wrong. About everything. The cruel jokes, the sabotage, all of it. Maybe you don't need to hear this, but I need to say it. You won. Not just because you're smart, but because you never became cruel like me. Chase. I sat still for a long time, eyes lingering on that final line. I didn't cry. I didn't smile. I just felt light. I placed the letter in a drawer, not as a gesture of forgiveness, but as a reminder. Some battles aren't won by the last one standing. They're won by those who chose to stand tall, without stepping on anyone else. A week later, we launched Spectrum Summer Lab, a hands-on summer program for autistic kids to explore coding, robotics, and social skills through interactive play. A large banner stretched overhead. Celebrate your difference. A curly-haired boy, maybe 10 years old, approached me with a small circuit board in his hand. He looked up at me and asked, "Mr. Noah, is it true people used to call you weird?" I laughed. Absolutely true. He frowned. So, how did you still become successful? I knelt down and placed a hand on his shoulder. By remembering this being weird isn't bad, it's a superpower. And if you learn how to use it, the world has to pay attention. He grinned wide and pure. I looked out over the field where dozens of kids were running, building, laughing, glowing with imagination. And in that moment, I knew my journey was only just beginning. That crisp autumn morning, I stood before the towering glass doors of Texas's first ever neurodiverse tech academy, a state-funded initiative I had the honor of co-founding. On the silver plaque at the entrance, sunlight reflected the words "Embrace Spectrum," Academy for Different Minds. And just below it, in smaller print yet to me, the biggest words I'd ever seen, founded by Noah Ryland. I took a step back and inhaled deeply. Today was the grand opening ceremony, and every major media outlet was covering it. There were state officials, education leaders, and of course Jonathan, once my mentor, now my partner in impact. But the most unexpected guests were my family, my mother-in-law and my father-in-law, Emma, and even the relatives who once smirked at me across that infamous dinner table. They all showed up. As I stepped up to the outdoor stage nestled between flags and leafy trees, my eyes scanned the crowd. I saw Emma nodding, her eyes glassy. My mother-in-law clutched my father-in-law's hand, lips pressed tight as if holding back tears. And I saw Chase. He stood at the back of the seating area, white shirt, no tie. Thinner than before? No one around him seemed to notice. But I did. I began my speech, my voice steady. Today is not just the inauguration of an academy. It marks the beginning of a new conversation, one about how we view difference. Not as a bug in the system, but as a unique operating system. Laughter rippled through the crowd, followed by applause. A few years ago, I stood in a room full of relatives and was mocked for my difference. But that night lit the first spark that brought me here. Because I realized I didn't need to be like them to have value. I paused. My gaze met Chase's. I don't need to get revenge. I just need to be honest with myself. And today, I'm not standing here to say I won. I'm standing here to invite everyone into a world where every kind of mind has a place. The courtyard erupted into applause. As I stepped down, Chase approached me. He didn't say much, just extended his hand. I looked at it rough, trembling slightly. I shook it. "You don't need to forgive," Chase whispered. "I just wanted to say thank you." I nodded. I didn't do this to settle a score. I did it because there are kids out there who deserve to be seen before they're made to feel invisible. A few weeks later, Spectrum Talk hit 1 million users nationwide. The media called it the breakthrough app, redefining how we engage with neurodivergent communication. Schools began adopting it into their core curricula. The federal government introduced it into public health pilot programs. I was invited to Washington, D.C., where I received the Tech Citizen of the Year award. When the host announced my name, the entire auditorium rose in applause. But for me, the greatest victory wasn't there. It came one late afternoon in my office. I was cleaning out a drawer when I came across that old letter from Chase. I sat down and reread every word. I thought about Jackson, that little boy who said, "Mom, smile" for the first time. I thought about the kids in our summer lab, coding robots and learning to collaborate. I thought about my mother-in-law, now a fierce advocate, speaking to parent groups on behalf of autistic children, lending her voice where mine once shook. I thought about myself. That Christmas night in the backyard, shaking under garden lights after being humiliated by people I called family. And I realized I didn't just survive, I built a world for people like me. Not by screaming, not by striking back in anger, but by standing up, with skill, with resolve, and with one powerful choice to not let pain define who I am.